Hey, section 4.2, Absolutism in Western Europe. We're going to talk primarily about Spain, which goes this way. There we go, that way. France, which goes that way. We are out in the garage again, and I will just show you. There's the door with a hole in it. I wonder who did that. And yes, some fine quality cardboard there on the other side. So, anyway, Absolutism in Western Europe. I just knocked on it to show that there's cardboard. Yeah, no, you're fine. You can interrupt. It's okay. Piper is here now. Here is the little turd herself. There she is. Piper, what are you doing? You drinking water? You want to hang out here and talk about Spain and France? Okay, whatever. Menu. Why does Spain go down? In France, power struggle between the monarchy and nobility, and then my boy, my man Louis XIV. We're going to talk all about him and how he is the ideal absolute ruler. Okay, Piper's slurping water. Spain. Lo siento. Why does Spain suck now? The decline of Spain in the 17th century. Listen, for our class so far, the first period of our class, Spain was awesome. I don't know what this guy's doing. I think it's a picture of like him and a bull, but the bull's like blocked. I don't know. Anyway, oh, I didn't know I could do this. Wow, this is cool. Should I go up here? I'm gonna go up here. Okay. Anyway, Ferdinand and Isabella centralizing power in Spain, uniting the country together, expelling all Jews and Muslims or Moors, the Reconquista, and then maintaining Catholic Spain through the Inquisition, bringing people to trial for supposed non-Catholic things. Charles V, strong ruler. Obviously the Holy Roman Emperor, but also King of Spain, laying the foundation, and also through exploration, bringing lots of wealth to Spain. The strongest under Philip II, and then the Armada happens. Of course, Spain's economy through its colonies. We've talked about mercantilism and how they're really using their colonies to increase wealth. The Armada, though, then sinks, and now 17th century Spain, not so great. So why? First of all, trade with colonies falls due to competition. Some of the colonies begin to maybe reach out and trade with other mother countries. Remember in our simulations, our games, that hasn't been happening, but now there's some colonies which are trying to break out and perhaps trade with others. The treasury is bankrupt. That's in part because of the Armada, and the peasantry will be slammed with taxes to try to make up that difference. So you've got a peasantry which is doing very little economic activity, because of the high taxes. There's very little middle class in Spain, and then the nobility just is not triggering any sort of economic growth. There's really not a great work ethic among the Spanish people at this point, and that is not going to help their economic activities. And then with the rise of prices, do what's called the price revolution, where prices rise. And due to the rising demand for supplies, again, population increasing, that's going to cause incredible inflation. And as we'll talk about in class briefly, the tax structure does not really change in Spain to help account for those changes in prices, to help refill the treasury. So all of this basically says economic problems really hurt Spain. Trying to break through the cat door. Look at her. It's not only economic struggles for Spain. You have the Armada that's defeated. Spain loses land after the 30 Years' War. But the biggest problem is that you have leaders and kings after Philip II who, due to the incestuous nature of their ancestors, lack the guile and ability to provide leadership for their country. And the best example of that is the last Habsburg king of Spain. His name is Charles II. Yes, his name is Charles II of Spain. I'll have to share in class some of my favorite stories involving this guy, but to say the least, his family shrub is complicated, and you can see here's Philip II right here, Charles V, as it goes down, second cousins. I don't know how it comes out, but yes, he is inbred level 5. I mean, it's getting serious when you get to the 5th level of inbredness. So Charles II, again, not a great leader, and that lack of consistent leadership will hurt the Spanish going forward. So all these reasons are hurting Spain going forward, and we replace them with France as the leader of Western Europe politically by the 17th century. Now, one thing to know about France, this is taxis. One thing to know about France going forward is that their Piper's trying to eat birdseed. She's being very distracting. Their population system, the way that their society is structured into what's called 3 estates. Okay, it's a feudal estate system. Country is 90% rural, so let's remember that as well. But you've got 3 estates, so people are grouped into 3 different groups. You have the first estate, which is called the clergy. Okay, that's your church officials. Second estate's the nobility. Those 2 groups pay very little tax to the government. Your third estate is literally everyone else. So everyone else on the pyramid that's not a clergy and nobility or even the royalty, obviously, they're going to be in that third estate, and they're going to pay all the taxes for France. So let's remember that setup, because not only for this section, but when we get to the French Revolution, that section or that setup is going to be important to remember. So 3-estate system. Now, the French monarchy. Their slogan going into the 17th century, as you see there, is "Suck it, nobles." It is going to be very clear that the monarchy is going to grab all the power in France. Starting with our boy Henry IV. If you remember, he was the Edict of Nantes. He was the man who was supposed to get married at the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, and as king converted to become a Catholic. Well, there he is in his older age. And what he does as king is he allows merchants to buy a position in the nobility, so rich merchants can become a noble. Now, keep in mind why that would be good. Go back and look at the estates. What's the plus to being a noble? So this is called the nobility of the robe, kind of new money. And if you can become a noble, that's going to basically cheapen the title of being a noble overall. So if you're the king, you can have merchants buy a title, and it's going to make the nobility a little less special to be in. Unfortunately, Henry IV was stabbed by man while riding in his carriage. It's a very sad way to go. It's a very extremist Catholic who didn't think Henry IV was Catholic enough. So he jumped into his carriage one fine day in Paris and stabbed him with a knife in the chest. No one thought to ask why Henry IV's legs turned him to bananas, but that's another story, I suppose. Now, you have a dude also, and this is a guy that we need to kind of pay attention to a little bit. After Henry IV dies, his son Louis XIII takes over. But Louis XIII he's kind of a dud. He doesn't really have the mental ability to be king. So in his place rules this man called Cardinal Richelieu. Richelieu he's a cardinal, he's a member of the church, but he's also a very political figure. And he creates something called the intendant system. And what the intendant system does is it divides France into different districts, and then it replaces the nobles in those districts in terms of doing like the government's work with local officials, or with servants rather. And it takes the localized people out and puts servants who report straight to the king to them. So here's a map. And basically, if your Paris is up here, I think in 12 or 6. So if you are the king, it's hard for you to enforce your rule in different parts of the country, right? So you get people loyal to you to go down there to each district. And in each district, they carry out your will or your laws or whatever. So it takes the nobles' chance away to be like locally troubling, right? So the noble can't, be out here number 2 or number 37 doing whatever with the king over there. If there's someone who's been sent by the king to go there, called these intendants, they go there and they serve basically as a mouthpiece for the king. So Richelieu, in that way, takes more control away from the nobility. However, the best example of a man who takes powers from the nobility and gives them to himself, and becomes the ideal absolute monarch is the man, Louis the 14th. I mean, look at the hair and the part. It's perfect. It's quite lovely. He is the absolute ruler. He becomes king at age 4. He doesn't start like running the show until he's 22, but he's king from age 4, and he has advisors ruling for him. His slogan, I am the state. English translation, I am the state. Remember, absolute rulers, they basically say, I am the government, right? And that's what Louis XIV is saying here. He becomes known as the Sun King. That is his ideal, his image, his propaganda. He wants to be compared and placed in the same area as the sun. Think about, what is the sun in the sky? What does it bring us on earth? That's what Louis XIV wanted to bring to France. And under his rule, France undoubtedly becomes the most powerful country in Europe, with the largest population, with the largest standing army, and with French culture beginning to dominate all around France. Or not just France, but Europe. Obviously, French culture is big in France. Who would have thought? Shocker. Now, how does Louis come to age, and how does he relate to the nobility? Well, young in his reign, and he's still, I think, getting about 10 or 11 years old, nobility across France revolt when the advisors to Louis attempt to raise their taxes. So the nobles revolt and storm the palace in France, or in Paris rather, where Louis lives, and this revolt is called the Fronde. And it's called the Fronde because the little children at that time in Paris played with this little slingshot, which was known as the Fronde. But in any case, the nobles revolt against the royal family, and Louis XIV reacts in a very distinct way, because a little story with it is that as the nobles stormed into Louis's palace, he hid in a closet. And in the closet, it was one of those closets that opened like from the middle, and he could see right through the gap, right through the little slit where the doors met. And he saw the nobles run into his room and ransack the room, steal some things looking for him. If you're Louis and you see this, he survives. They don't get him or catch him or anything. But now you start to distrust this noble class. What can you do as king to take that power away? And when he's 22, he's going to begin to do that. Now, how does he organize his government? Hey, you're going to bring him in from the middle class, right? That bourgeoisie, that middle class, that's where his advisors come from. He won't go to the nobility. He will not ask them for assistance. He's going to continue Richelieu's intendant system, and he's going to exhibit not only control over the nobility, not only control over the bourgeoisie by creating a sense of loyalty, right, recruiting them as advisors, he's also going to control the peasant class. He will force peasants to, at different points of the year, work on national projects for France, whether that's meaning to build a road, a bridge. They're going to help build his palace. We're going to talk about it at length, called Versailles. Things like that to help France become stronger. This forced labor system is called the corvée. And if a peasant refuses it, they either get thrown into the army or worse. Okay, so it is basically unpaid labor that the peasant has to do on account for Louis's own power. And then, like I said, many peasants are conscripted or drafted into the army. So it's certainly not a great place to be if you are very poor, because Louis does exploit the peasant class for his advantage. Two other aspects of how Louis kind of shows his own power. As king, one of his slogans was he desired for France one king, one law, one faith. And you saw that come out with religion. He's Catholic, but he has no interest in doing what the Pope says. Remember, we've kind of moved past that. So he's going to be Catholic, but only in appearance only. And by doing so, he realizes religious minorities in his country serve as a threat to his loyalty or to his unity. You don't want 10% of the country worshiping in a different way. So he issues what's called the Edict of Fontainebleau, which rebukes, or it should be revokes, the Edict of Nantes. It takes away that right for Huguenots to practice their faith openly. So again, he is attempting to unify the country by stripping away any individual rights. And by doing so, 200,000 Calvinists or Huguenots say, nope, we're out. We are leaving town. And with them, they take, well, their Protestant work ethic. And that might have an impact on the economy. And this terrifying image here might show, as constructed by a Protestant, the impact that Louis's reign had on their faith. We'll come back to this image in class and look at that a little closer. Now, as far as the economy goes, his man is named Jean-Baptiste Colbert, the finance minister who is a big believer in mercantilism, creating a stronger internal economy to help maximize your self-sufficiency potential. We construct roads and canals. We raise taxes or tariffs on foreign goods coming into the country. So that means people are encouraged to buy French. And with the better roads and canals, you can move goods from place to place. You help your economy inside of the country. You don't have to go outside to get goods. Again, if you try to go outside to get goods, you're sending wealth away. That's helping your enemies. By 1683, France is the top industrial country in Europe. They are a powerhouse, to be sure. Any weaknesses over the economy? Well, the peasants aren't doing very well. The Navy is kind of weak, too. Although for France, you really don't need it as long as Spain's going down. And as we're going to see, England is having all sorts of problems in the 1600s. But now we get to the thing that hurts Louis the most, and that is the fighting wars. Okay? Just stretch out a little bit. Okay, limber up. Water. Okay. Anyway, Louis XIV in wars. He fights wars a lot. He's punching a lot of people. 2/3 of his reign, France is at war. At first, they're great, but eventually they kick him in the butt, and they become incredibly financially damaging. And we could look at a lot of the wars, but we're going to look at one specifically. It's called the War of Spanish Succession. So remember that guy, the incest guy we kind of looked at there at the beginning in Spain? He dies without a son. And in the line of succession, Louis XIV's grandson is in line to inherit the throne. So Louis knows this is actually a problem because his grandson will do whatever Louis wants. And if Louis accepts the throne on his behalf, people are starting to think Spain and France might merge together. If he denies it, then they will go to actually the King of Austria, which is one of Louis's rivals. So he's kind of in a pickle here. Speaking of pickles. So Louis actually accepts the throne for his grandson, which causes everybody else and their mother in Europe to rise and attack France because the balance of power is now starting to shift incredibly in France's direction. So you have a 13 or 12-year war that's on and off, but it's incredibly damaging for France eventually. And by 1713, we got a treaty. It's called the Treaty of Utrecht. And through this treaty, it's not great for France because England actually comes up as a big winner. They take some Spanish possessions. They take some land from France. And the grandson becomes the king. However, it's said in the Treaty of Utrecht that France and Spain can never become one country. So now you have actually a Bourbon, the family Bourbon, a Bourbon as king of Spain. And as we have already stated, we still have a Bourbon of king of France with Louis XIV. But the big theme here is these wars are incredibly damaging on Louis and on France because of the financial commitment that comes from it. And let's talk the cost. If they destroy the economy, bankrupt the government, and by Louis's death in 1715, there he is on his deathbed, things are in bad shape. And he's looking at a huge debt that will be paid by the Third Estate. So the taxes will rise. The Third Estate continues to be punched while the nobility and the clergy get off scot-free and don't have to pay that tax money to recover from the debt. And as that debt increases over time, the Third Estate, their tax burden becomes more and more, and eventually they might snap. They might say enough's enough. And when that happens, sharpen your guillotines because things are going to get a little crazy. So that's basically it. There's a lot there. Okay, there's a lot there on Louis XIV. But what I want you to be able to tell me and know is that how does this guy Louis XIV, how does he create a system of absolutism? How does he create a situation where he makes himself the man and increases France's power and influence? And in class, like I've told you, we're going to really look at this thing called the Palace of Versailles because it really visually shows us Louis's power. So I think that's quite enough for 4.2.